Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the workshop on Green Social Sustainable Bonds launching at the Philippine Initiative. This is the first of a series of webinars organized and brought to you by the joint efforts of the Capital Markets Development Council, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, and the Asian Development Bank. We will begin this afternoon's activities with a short prayer, followed by the Philippine National Anthem. Let us remember that we are in the presence of the Lord, and of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, teach us to be generous. Teach us to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward, save that of knowing that we do your most holy will. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We will now proceed with the playing of the Philippine National Anthem. Thank you. Let us now move on to the brief introduction of our speakers for today. We have lined up for this afternoon's program a number of noteworthy speakers. We will be joined by Mr. Rob Fowler, ADB consultant. Rob has been an expert in sustainable finance and green bonds with more than 25 years of international experience in climate change, sustainability, energy, utilities, heavy industry, oil and gas, infrastructure financing, regulatory regimes, and capital raising within the region. More recently, Rob has worked for 5 years with the Climate Bonds Initiative, where he assisted green bond issuers, bankers, investors, and verifiers to navigate the new world of sustainable finance. We will also be joined by Mr. Cosin Pongsopol, Financial Sector Specialist of the ADB. He supports Kunpok, supports the ADB's Financial Cooperation and Integration team and promoting financial market integration in ASEAN and ASEAN Plus 3. He's leading the Asian bond markets initiatives on promoting sustainable finance development in ASEAN Plus 3. And prior to joining the ADB, Kunpok has almost 10 years of professional work experience with the Office of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Thailand, where he was responsible for the development of international cooperation strategy and represented the SEC in international meetings, including the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. He will also be joined by Mr. Richard Supangan, Senior Economics Officer of the ADB. Ricky Supangan is a Senior Economics Officer and Regional Cooperation Department of the Asian Development Bank. He joined the ADB in 2006 and has been working on undertakings related to financial cooperation and integration. Mr. Karthik Iyer, consultant of the ACGF, will also be joining us for today. He is the Green Finance and Capital Markets Consultant for the Asian Development Bank, working with ASEAN's Catalytic Green Finance Facility and Innovation Hub. Prior to relocating to Asia, he was Commercial Director in Climate Bonds Initiative's head office in London and had oversight for partnerships and funding, investor engagement, certification, as well as geographical oversight for India, China, and Asia Pacific teams. Karthik is also an advisor on CBI's senior management team. We are also being joined by Mr. Anuj Awasthi, Vice President for Operations of the CGIF. Anuj, on the other hand, has oversight in the guarantee operations of CGIF. He was formerly the Managing Director at Societe Generale, heading the financing initiatives for the Global Markets Division for ASEAN in South Asia, where he worked in developing the bank's local currency bond origination and structuring business. Prior to that, he held various positions with Nomura, Merrill Lynch, and HSBC in a career that spans over 20 years in derivatives, hedging, balance sheet management, and local currency financing solutions for corporates and institutions in South Asia and ASEAN. Lastly, there will be 2 Q&A sessions for today, which will be moderated by our very own Mr. Sinen L. Matoto. For most of the FINEX members, you may know him as Mr. Bing Matoto, President and Director of Vixal Investment from 2007 to 2017. And prior to that, President and Director of AB Capital and Investment Corporation. Presently, Bing is acting as a consultant and capital market specialist. To formally start our program proper, may we now call on our very own Attorney Dick Dubalabad, Co-Chair of the Capital Markets Development Council, for her opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to welcome you all to this workshop on what we call the Green Social Sustainable Bonds, the launching of the Philippine Initiative. This initiative is directly aligned with the goals and strategies of the Capital Markets Development Council under its plan to increase issuer participation in the Philippine capital markets. The CMD Plan 2019-2025, it's actually a 5-year plan, is based on a top-down vision in line with the government's goal for the nation's Ambisyon Natin 2040, and is part of national priority linking policy reforms to accelerate business growth and contribute to the national economic development. It focuses on resilient and inclusive financial sectors that fosters capital market development by increasing, first of all, issuer participation and institutional and retail investor base, as well as incubating and accelerating growth in the contractual savings market. The Council aims to achieve all these strategic objectives with various carefully crafted action plans, which include this afternoon's launching for the promotion of environmental, social, and governance principles, and the introduction of new bond structures and implementation of programs that will encourage the issuance of bonds, among others. This program is not only in line with the capital markets initiative, but it is also as a response to a call for climate change initiatives in the Philippines. The Philippines, as you all know, is one of the most vulnerable nations to climate-related weather events. According to the latest 2020 Global Climate Risk Index by the international environmental think tank German Watch, the Philippines is the second most climate affected country after Japan. I'd like to emphasize that. But on a developing economy consideration, the Philippines is first in the world as the most susceptible to the adverse effect of climate change. The Philippines was repeatedly hammered by strong typhoons over a decade, indicating that global warming will make and is absolutely already making these disturbances far more damaging than they would have been in the past. We do not need to look back for that. In 2020 alone, just last year, we experienced 22 typhoons, which is higher than the average of 20 typhoons a year. Strong typhoons evolved as these now came at the last quarter of the year, and these were more vicious and destructive. So I am sure you still could remember the Typhoon Quinta, the Typhoon Raleigh, which is the world's most powerful tropical cyclone in 2020, and of course, Ulysses, which is just last December. So aside from the loss of lives, these typhoons damage, as you can see in the picture now, infrastructure, agriculture, and most of all, our economic activities. According to NEDA, the total damage and loss brought by Typhoon Yolanda, the strongest typhoon that ever hit the country, was estimated at 571 billion, or about 5% of the GDP in 2013. By the way, that Typhoon Yolanda is also the world's strongest in the recent past. So the Philippine government now is responding to this global climate change through a capital markets initiative and is further advancing the implementation of the ambitious target in the Paris Agreement, which was signed together with 192 countries in 2016. The country is poised to be the first in the Southeast Asian region to set a moratorium on new coal, as the Department of Energy announced in November that it will not endorse new coal plants and advocate for the transition from fossil fuel-based technology utilization to cleaner energy sources. In line with all of this, during the CMDC meeting in 2020, chaired by Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez, the ADB presented an overview of their regional technical assistance program to develop green local currency bonds to support much needed sustainable infrastructure investment. So following discussion with the Capital Markets Council, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FINEX, of course us, and the Asian Development Bank, it was agreed that a series of workshops targeted at various stakeholders should be organized throughout 2021, and this is the first of that series. So today's workshop will provide an overview of the green, social, and sustainable bonds and highlights the benefits of issuing and labeling these thematic bonds. Development partners from the ADB, from Credit Guarantee and Investment Facility, today will discuss available resources that can support the issuance of relevant thematic bonds in the Philippines. So on behalf of the Capital Market Development Council, I would like to express my sincerest appreciation to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the ADB for co-organizing this event. I hope that this workshop this afternoon, we will be able to learn and promote greater awareness of sustainable bonds among corporate bond issuers to benefit together from the collaboration and exchange of practices and experiences from relevant stakeholders and act together to issue more relevant thematic bonds in the Philippines on a sustainable matters. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney Dick, for that wonderful opening remarks. Now, may I now move on with a quick introduction of a very familiar face to us all. We are joined today by the Honorable Efiro Luis B. Amatong, who has been appointed as a Commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission since 2014 and is currently the Supervising Commissioner for the Markets and Securities Regulation Department and the Economic Research and Training Department. Before joining the SEC, Commissioner Amatong has been the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Finance, where he had an active role in the privatization of 74 hectares of the Food Terminal Inc., with a value of about 24 billion. He was also involved in a number of public-private partnership projects, such as the School Infrastructure Project Phase, the NIA Expressway Project, and the Automated Fare Collection System. So without further ado, may we now invite the Honorable Efiro Amatong, Commissioner of the SEC, for the keynote address. Commissioner F.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Pam. So if I could just share my screen, and I seem to be having internet connection problems, so maybe in case anything goes wrong, maybe the Secretariat can also help in case my screen goes down. But good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for participating in this afternoon's webinar. First of all, let me thank the ADB, Phoenix, and the Capital Market Development Council for co-organizing this event. I only have a few minutes with you today. We have a very packed afternoon, which I think will be very productive for everyone. So let me just concentrate on trying to respond to 4 basic questions that the participants might have of this webinar. First, why is sustainable finance important? It might be obvious to some, but it might still be relatively new to many of you. Second, what are we doing at the SEC and among other government agencies to promote and support the development of sustainable finance here in the Philippines? Third, how effective have these efforts been? And fourth, what are our next steps? So with that, let me take you to the first slide of my presentation. Why consider sustainable finance? And I think my answer is really in that red circle that you're seeing in front of you in this slide. There is actually an astonishing amount of global capital looking for sustainable investments. The current estimate is over 103 trillion US dollars. That amount represents the assets under management of something like 3,756 firms worldwide, 497 of which are from the Asia-Pacific region. These are firms that have signed on to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI. The signatories to the PRI report on their sustainable investments and include sustainability in their investment decisions. Now, this is, as you can see from the chart, this is an increasing figure. 2 years ago, the estimate was only 82 trillion of assets under management, held by 2,300 firms, only 217 of which were in Asia Pacific. So in 2 years, PRI signatories increased by 63%, while the Asia Pacific component of asset managers signing up for the UN Principles for Responsible Investment more than doubled. The observation here is the demand continues to be greater than the supply of sustainable investments, despite the fact that sustainable issuance, green, social, sustainability, or sustainable bonds have been increasing. In fact, 2020, despite the pandemic, was a record-breaking year for this market. According to figures from the Environment Finance Bond Database, total green, social, and sustainable bond issuances crossed 600 billion US dollars in 2020, nearly double the 326 billion issued in 2019, and almost $400 billion more than what was issued in 2018. Despite that, again, the supply of sustainable capital is much greater than the demand for sustainable investment continues to be much greater than the supply of investment opportunities. Now, if that's the demand side, if there's ample capital looking to make sustainable investments throughout the world, in this slide, let me walk you through last week as a kind of snapshot of how sustainability and climate are impacting on business and business trends here and abroad. Let's just take a look at some of the events that happened just last week. Now, Attorney Dick Dubaladad, in her opening, has already mentioned the fact that the Philippines is among the particularly vulnerable countries to climate change. But last Monday, I'm sure many of us were surprised to hear of the extreme weather events happening in the United States state of Texas, a state that's not particularly known for cold weather. This extremely cold weather in Texas last week caught many power and utility companies by surprise and unprepared. These utilities had not taken steps to ensure reliability by preparing for what was up to that point an unusual and almost unimaginable event. Instead, as one official said, we were prepared for the most severe cold we had experienced to date, which had been 2011. But last week's temperature in the southern United States were far below that of 2011. This is yet another clear demonstration of how climate change is increasingly giving rise to unprecedented weather events all over the world, much like our own experience with Super Typhoon Yolanda in 2013. At the time, analysts were saying that was a typhoon of a scale that was beyond the models of weather of meteorologists throughout the world. Now let's move from Monday to Tuesday. On Tuesday, San Miguel Global Power announced that it expects to complete 14 battery energy storage systems, or BESSs, with a combined capacity of 360 megawatts within the next 2 years. The company hopes to bring 10 of these battery storage systems online by the end of this year, 2021. Now, some of you may not know, but large-scale battery storage is one of the technologies believed necessary to make renewable energy more reliable and dependable, given our current grid infrastructure. And until recently, this kind of large-scale battery storage was thought to be a technology still 10 years away from practical deployment. But a Filipino company will be deploying this within the year. On Wednesday, BlackRock, which is among the world's largest institutional investors, announced detailed climate targets for companies, citing 5 UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically saying, and I quote, BlackRock believes that sustainability risk, particularly climate risk, is investment risk. Accordingly, sustainability is a key component of our investment approach, unquote. BlackRock will continue to look for companies to address near-term climate risk and position themselves for long-term financial viability, limiting emissions to achieve the 1.5-degree threshold, and articulate and report on rigorous targets to realize net zero emissions. Now, this trend toward ESG part of investment decision-making process is not limited to these very large institutional investors like BlackRock. So on Thursday, last week, the local asset manager, ATR Asset Management, or ATRAM, launched their own Sustainable Development and Growth Fund, which, and I quote, will invest in companies that score high in terms of the integration of the UN SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, into their operations and strategy, and have reported attractive returns relative to valuation, unquote. This fund, just started last week by Atram, will initially be comprised of an equity portfolio that will have an initial 20 large, mid, and small cap companies publicly listed on the Philippine Stock Exchange. Also last Thursday, the US Federal Reserve Governor Lael Brainard, in a speech entitled "The Role of Financial Institutions in Tackling the Challenges of Climate Change," went on and said, and I quote, "Climate change and the transition to a low-carbon economy create both risks and opportunities for the financial sector." This was the first time that US Fed has directly linked the potential risk and reward associated with climate change. Governor Brainard announced that the US Fed would join the international group of central banks on this topic, known as the Network for Greening the Financial System, or NGFS. Now, here in the Philippines, actually, not only is the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas already a member of NGFS, having joined NGFS last year, in fact, the BSP has already issued its Sustainable Finance Framework through Circular Number 1085 Series of 2020, last April 29, 2020. Speaking to the Institute of Corporate Directors last October 28, BSP Governor Benjamin Jokno said, and I quote, "The BSP is committed to working closely with other financial regulators and authorities to accelerate progress towards sustainable development and to put in place cohesive reforms to safeguard the Philippine financial system from the impact of climate change and other environment and social risks. Indeed, the financial sector holds a unique position in advancing the sustainability agenda. Clearly, we can no longer afford to ignore climate change or sustainability issues as a governance priority. By deciding to finance sustainable projects, you create more value for the company's stakeholders while preserving the environment and humanity," unquote. So you can see that just by looking at last week, sustainability concerns have had a significant impact on business and financial trends. And in many cases, Philippines is on par, if not a leader, internationally compared to other countries. Now, if substantial funding is available and sustainability is becoming more and more a focus area for businesses, you might also want to ask, what has the SEC done to support the development of the sustainable finance market? And here, let me show you a brief slide on our major initiative as part of the ASEAN Capital Market Forum. So the Philippine SEC has issued regulations that are intended to connect investors and issuers, that pool of $103.4 trillion US dollars, with potential ASEAN sustainable issuers, including issuers in the Philippines, sources of capital with users of capital. In particular, as co-chair with the Securities Commission of Malaysia of the ASEAN Capital Market Forum's Sustainable Finance Working Group, Philippine SEC helped to develop the ASEAN Green, Social, and Sustainability Bond Standards. Now, I won't go into much detail about the standards themselves or the process, the actual process for issuing green, social, or sustainability bonds, since these are topics that will be handled by other speakers this afternoon. But just to give you an idea, fundamentally, the ASEAN standards provide a framework that ensures transparency. The standards provide clear guidance to potential issuers on how to tap this growing sustainable finance market, and at the same time provide some kind of assurance to investors who are committed to sustainable investing that they can make informed judgments and rely on issuances carrying the ASEAN label, that these issuances in fact adhere to international best practice and meet international expectations. Now, what I do want to touch on in greater detail is how effective these initiatives have been. Now, these initiatives were really launched towards the end of 2017, in fact, November 2017. And you can see from the slide here that 3 years after ASEAN introduced these standards at the end of 2017 and 2018, and adopted here in the Philippines in the middle of 2019, we think both ASEAN and the Philippines have relatively done well. Since 2017, ASEAN labeled issuances, so ASEAN green, social, and sustainable bonds, have totaled roughly 8.58 billion US dollars equivalent, with 3.85 billion or 45%. So that orange portion in the pie chart to the right of this slide represents Philippine issuances, which total ASEAN labeled Philippine issuances almost 4 billion US dollars within 3 years, and despite the pandemic beginning last year. Now, what is of even more interest is if you look closely at Philippine issuances, Philippine green, social, and sustainable bonds, you can see that the Philippines has done well in more than just being a major issuer of bonds. First of all, you'll notice that Philippine issuance has been private sector led. Unlike many other countries where the main issuer has been the sovereign, in the Philippines, largely, it has been the private sector that has successfully issued green, social, and sustainable bonds. Although we do have, at the sub-sovereign level, successful issuances by both DBP and Land Bank. The other thing that you should notice is it's very diverse. So not only is the issuance in the Philippines private sector led, but this issuance is occurring across multiple sectors. We've also issued all types of GSS bonds, green, social, but also sustainability, DBP, RCBC, Land Bank, Manila Water, and also social, BPI's care bonds or COVID response bonds, which were issued last year. Philippine firms have both issued onshore in pesos and offshore in dollars. In fact, we've also issued in Swiss francs in Europe. So not only a diverse range of types of bonds, but multiple different currencies, onshore and offshore. The onshore issues have ranged in size from Arthaland's 3 billion peso green bonds to BPI's 21.5 billion social bonds. So you can have small issuers and large issuers, both successful issuances. Offshore, Manila Water has issued 500 million US dollars worth of sustainability bonds last July, while AC Energy has raised a total of 1.1 billion US dollars in green bonds offshore. Philippine issuers have ranged across multiple industries: 6 banks, 4 energy firms, a water utility company, and a real estate developer. Philippine firms have achieved some notable firsts. So if you notice, this figure of 220 billion is more than the almost 4 billion US dollars that I mentioned in the previous slide. And this is because even before the ASEAN standards were issued in late 2017 and then adopted in the Philippines in 2018, Philippines was already a leader in the issuance in this area. Notably, including the Aboitiz Power Renewable pioneering issuance in 2016 of 12.5 billion pesos, which was supported, in fact, by ADB. This was the first geothermal deal in the whole world to be certified by Climate Bonds Initiative. So what we're trying to say here is not only are we a substantial issuer, but the issuance has benefited or many companies across a wide spectrum of Philippine businesses have successfully tapped sustainable finance through green, social, and sustainability bonds. And also, these firms that have issued have reported to us that they have realized many of the benefits typically attributed to green, social, and sustainable bond issuers. They were able to widen their investor base. They also broadened their appeal. Issuing labeled bonds provided them access to more investors and increasing their list of potential funders for future issuances. These kinds of issuances have also enhanced their reputation and allowed them to position better in front of both local and international investors. And you'll see from this slide, this is a slide showing spreads, both offshore in dollars and pesos. The spreads or the difference between the reference rate and the coupon rate of these issuances at the time of issuance. And you can see that the pricing is more or less competitive. And you'll hear later from the speakers that this is a very hot topic when it comes to green, social, and sustainable bonds, whether there is a pricing impact. And I invite you to draw your own conclusions from the data that we're providing with you this afternoon. Now, this initial success that we have experienced both in ASEAN and the Philippines with respect to green, social, and sustainability bond standards has encouraged us both at the national and the regional levels to embark on further initiatives in order to attract more sustainable investment into the Philippines, and also to make it easier for more Philippine companies, a broader range of Philippine companies, to better access available sustainable financing opportunities. And among the initiatives that are upcoming include the development of sustainable fund standards. So you're going to already see ATRAM is already a leader, even before, just like Aboitiz Power, even before these standards are developed, they've already issued a sustainable fund. They've already launched successfully a sustainable fund. We're also working towards introducing sustainability-linked bond standards, transition bond standards, and also developing a taxonomy or a set of definitions of what we mean by green, social, and sustainable, both at the regional ASEAN level and at the national level here in the Philippines. But among the most important initiatives that we recognize is really mainstreaming green finance and making it accessible to more people and institutions through capacity building. And this is why we're very grateful to the support that we're getting from PHINEX, from the Capital Market Development Council, and of course, the ADB. This is really the purpose of this afternoon's webinar, to kick off, as Attorney Dick Dubaladan already mentioned, to kick off a whole series of webinars as part of ADB's technical assistance to the Capital Market Development Council, supporting and promoting green and sustainable finance. Please note that this is not the only technical assistance that ADB is prepared to provide. I think there will be speakers later from the CGIF, the Guarantee Fund administered by ADB, as well as ACGF, a de-risking facility that ADB helps to provide to make projects more bankable and investable. In fact, going beyond this afternoon's webinar, or even the series of webinars that we have lined up, there is a whole host of technical assistance programs being provided by both bilateral and multilateral partners already ongoing or about to commence in the Philippines. So I hope you can see that we're really taking this capacity building push very seriously in order to provide as many Philippine companies with opportunities as possible. In closing, let me say that a resilient and inclusive economy is part of the Duterte administration's ambition natin 2040. You heard that already from Attorney Dubaladan at the opening. As Filipinos, we already know better than many others the devastating impact that climate change-related extreme weather events, like all the typhoons that were already mentioned, can have on our country, our businesses, and our families. COVID-19 has further demonstrated the need for resilience as well as robustness. We need to be able to withstand the impact of the event and then bounce back as quickly as possible. Sustainable finance presents the Philippines both an opportunity and a solution. As we plan and grow with sustainability in mind, we are able to attract the interest of investors looking to make such substantial sustainable investments. Investors are increasingly looking for financial returns that also contribute to a cleaner, more just planet. Now more than ever, there is an alignment of interests between international investors and our own national investment priorities. We at the SEC will continue to promote sustainability and support transparent practices that attract investment to the Philippines. And we look to you to seize this opportunity for your own firms and for our country as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. I hope you will find today's discussions and this whole series of webinars useful and informative. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner F. That was very clearly captured the theme for today's webinar. Clearly, green, social, and sustainable finance could not have come at a better time. Now, as we move on to our speakers, just a general reminder for our attendees, the materials from today's webinar will be made available after this presentation. And there is also a Q&A button on your screens via Zoom where you can input your questions. There will be a short Q&A forum right after our first two speakers. And then there will be a Q&A session again close to the tail end of our program. So with that, let's move on to Mr. Rob Fowler for his discussion on sustainable finance defined. Rob?
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay. Thanks very much, and I hope you are enjoying this show so far. It's been very interesting for me, and an exciting time for sustainable finance, I think, all around the world, and particularly in the Philippines. I'm going to try and take you through a bit of a high-level understanding of what terminology means. What is sustainable finance? What is ESG? What's green, blue, transition? All these words that people are throwing around. I'm going to try and help you see how they all fit together and how it works. So let's jump in. Okay, ESG is something which has become very, very popular. As you saw from the charts previously, the volume of money being invested with this sort of thing going on is quite substantial and growing. ESG is essentially a risk focus. They're trying to figure out what are the risks which are going to flow through to the financial or credit risk associated with that investment, and how can we use those ESG scores or ratings or a better understanding of ESG to screen out those investments, to reduce the risk that environment, social or governance flaws or faults or failures are going to affect the investment itself. Now that's becoming very, very strong and very popular. We've seen real examples of where ESG issues do have an impact on financing. And so it's an important issue to consider. Now, the other side of that coin is sustainable finance. This is much more about the impact of that investment. What is that investment going to do? How is it going to impact or improve or adjust or change the situation? And most of the time it's looking at things like climate change or environment. We're starting to see more and more around social and the impacts on social well-being and benefits. But often it's really trying to identify which investments are ready for the future. Rather than trying to screen out risks to the existing situation, they're trying to identify which investments, which types of assets fit into this future picture of where we are. Now, as we can see, ESG investment is becoming very, very popular. This chart here is just for the USA, which has not had a very strong alignment between the recent government administration and environmental objectives, but even so, you can see the rapid rise in sustainable investing in the US. So this is a trend that's not going to go away. It really has seen a large body of effort, and I think PRI has been a great initiative to help bring that together. But it has really been led by the EU and US, also Japan and also China. And of course, ASEAN needs to figure out how it fits in and how the investors in ASEAN will actually follow this trend. the volume of sustainable finance products available is just not keeping up. The investors are searching and searching for these things, and it's really an interesting time to be in that market, to be selling these products. There's quite a strange dynamic in how investors are searching for them and desperate for them to a degree. Now, all deals we see going out, whether it's labeled green, social, or even transition, are heavily oversubscribed. And the issuers are seeing a lot of benefits from that process. They're seeing a lot of ability to attract the investors they're looking for and to get a bit more leverage out of those investors. Now, the products are diversifying. We're seeing lots of different flavors of sustainable finance, as well as lots of different sectors being touched by these products. But they're all growing strongly, all growing really strongly. Now, this different flavors and structures is a really healthy sign of this market. If we see this sort of level of demand, we need to see a broad spectrum of different products and investment types, whether it's geography or currency or structure. Asset managers and investors all around the world are looking to fill their portfolios, and those need to be diversified by nature. Now, there are many, many flavors of sustainable finance so far. We saw some new ones coming up recently, but the main one we've seen is green bonds, green loans. And this is a fairly intuitive sort of feeling. Is it green? Is it more environmentally friendly? Is it improving the environment or reducing the environmental damage? That's a very broad category. We've seen a lot of activity there. We can also be more specific within the environmental and green space. And is it climate aligned? And so the Climate Bonds Initiative has that climate bonds label there. And that's really trying to align the assets with what we'll need already now to be ready for that future. So what's the vision in the future of a low carbon, climate resilient economy? And how does that relate to assets now? Those ones are climate aligned. So it's quite an interesting sort of subdivision, I suppose, of green. Then we have blue. And I think in the Philippines in particular, the blue economy, so to speak, the water-based, the ocean-based, the sea, that really has a huge part to play in the Philippines' way of life and the way it works. So blue investments are also looking at that water-based and ocean, sea-based approaches. Now, transition is something that's come up just recently. It's really a bit different. It is definitely around environment and often around climate. But it's something that is trying to sort of, I suppose, provide a good way to highlight the benefits of moving towards a greener future, but it's not stuff that's there already. It's not stuff that's going to be, the same in 2050 or when we have a net zero economy. So the transition label is very important. It's had a lot of attention lately, and it's great to hear that ASEAN is working on putting together some detailed guidance on what transition means. Now, on the other side of it, we have a social focus as well. And just in 2020, we've started to see what we all know now is a massive social challenge around pandemics. And so we've seen a lot of financing, which has been labeled pandemic, a lot in China in particular. We're also seeing a lot of gender discussion, and a lot of gender issues are coming to the forefront, and those are being represented in financing as well. Microfinance has been quite a long-running approach to improving the social status and improving the access to finance for a lot of underrepresented communities. So those deals and those fundings continue to grow. And of course, we have this interesting part of the bond market, which is catastrophe bonds. These are a bit different in the way they're structured, but they're essentially trying to fund the recovery after a massive catastrophe. Quite complex instruments, but are coming to the fore again, as we see, as storms and other things make a huge difference. If you put those two things together, you essentially get this sustainability focus for these products. Now, in the way that the guidelines have been written, green plus social gives you a sustainable label. But we also have the overriding sustainable development goals, which are incredibly important and very colourful and complex, but they are often a way for someone to identify how the investments are assisting and how that transaction is going to contribute. Now, we've seen a lot of green bonds. We've seen a lot of these activities around bonds in the capital markets. We're starting to see more and more loans as well, and that's an encouraging sign because it brings it out of that scale that capital markets require and brings it down into more of the medium-sized sort of activities, which is great, or in markets where there isn't a mature bond capital market. We also see sukuk. The structures that are available here, the labeling of these instruments doesn't really depend on the structure or the financial credit structure of the instrument. So sukuks have been very popular, particularly in Indonesia, and we'll expect to see more of those. We have asset-backed securities, which is where you bring lots of small investments together and bring them up into one bigger thing, and residential mortgage-backed securities as well. Those are ways to bring smaller green assets or normal assets together and wrap them up into something that's big enough for the capital markets to digest. And they can be very useful, especially when you're addressing small-scale activities like solar or green homes, and they can work very well for social focus as well as a green focus. And of course, higher up the investment chain, we're starting to see more and more of these products wrapped up into funds with a particular theme or a particular geographic or currency bent. We're starting to see exchange traded funds looking at these things to try and give people a broader exposure to the sector without specific individual exposures. And of course, indices follow on quickly after that. So it's a really interesting time to be seeing this all expand and increase. There's a lot of flexibility in all of these things, as you can see. Now, there are essentially two different structures that we look at in sustainable finance. One is commonly known as use of proceeds, and the other one is called sustainability linked. And now the use of proceeds one was sort of created, I suppose, from the thematic or green space in 2007, but it's been used as a structure for a very long time, where there's a clear purpose for what you're going to use the capital for. Now, sustainability linked is something that's come out just in the last couple of years, and that's really trying to, I suppose, link the performance of the entity, whether it's some sort of sustainability target or climate target or green target, and then try and adjust the return or the interest paid on a fixed interest product to sort of incentivize that, I suppose. Now, in the terms of use of proceeds, we'll go into each one of these in just a little bit of detail. In use of proceeds, essentially what you're promising to do is to have enough eligible projects, assets, or activities, so green assets, whether it's solar farms or green buildings or water, those sorts of things. You're meant to have enough value of those, exposure to enough value of those to exceed or be equivalent to the bond you issue or the net proceeds from the issuance. So if you issue $100 million worth of green bonds, if your net proceeds is say 95, 98, then you need to basically have enough assets, 98 up to 100 or more of green assets to meet that. That's the structure that's meant to work. Now, it can be the actual money you raise, or it can be an equivalent amount, because cash is essentially fungible within a larger corporation. Now, this structure means that there's a direct line of sight between the investor who's high up in the tree, maybe taking out a small piece of a bond investment or a slice of an ETF with those bonds. And you can sort of run it down and see, okay, the money does flow down and there are the assets on the ground. There are the green assets or the eligible assets, depending what flavor you're using. Now, this is a really important feature because it enables the different levels of the investment chain to sort of add up and sum up and look at their own book and look at how they refinance and that sort of thing. So we see loans to individual entities being labeled green, perhaps, going to a bank, who then has a whole bunch of these loans and then can wrap it up and issue a bond into the capital market. So, and then an investor buys the bond and puts it into a fund. You know, that line of sight is really important in the use of proceeds structure. It's quite convenient, but it needs very, very clear definitions about what is an eligible asset, what is green enough, what is socially beneficial enough. And so that's a really important challenge. And I think everyone's trying to work on that at the moment. And it's interesting, it's getting quite difficult to find enough of these green assets or these blue or transition or whatever kinds of assets to actually meet the demand. So there's a bit of a tension there about how many things are actually on the ground now and how they can be financed. The sustainability linked approach is a bit different, and it really tries to create an incentive with a step up or a step down in the credit approach of the deal, so in the legal contract. And it's trying to provide that incentives for reaching specific targets. Now, the cost to actually achieve the target, so if a company says, I'm going to achieve target of net zero by 2030, which is great, the cost to achieve that target is not actually related to the size of the financing. So they can say, well, we're going to put out a $2 billion sustainability linked deal, and we're going to meet this X target. That target might only cost them $200 million to meet, which is a lot of money, but it's still not related to the actual size of the financing. And so that means it's quite hard for investors up and down the chain to really figure out how their contribution adds up. and how their exposure to that product actually aligns with what's happening on the ground. So it's an interesting time. That structure is being investigated and explored, and we're seeing a lot of interesting developments, and it's great to see ASEAN looking to create guidance there as well. Okay, in use of proceeds, we'll dive into this bit a little bit more. This is where we really see green, social, sustainable bonds. They're using a use of proceeds structure. And very importantly, there are some global principles for how you do that. They've been developed by a group of issuers, investors, and banks, all got together to form the Green Bond Principles Executive Committee. Now, ICMA, a very large industry association, they sort of support that group and keep it going and provide the secretariat. And the Green Bond Principles have been a really useful foundation for how different guidelines around the world have been prepared and developed, and creates a lot of comparability for investors to look at these deals. Now, use of proceeds, process for selection, management of proceeds, reporting, that's the 4 pillars that they have there, as well as an external review to check that it's all okay. And there's an enormous amount of guidance available from ICMA. So green bond principles, social bond principles, sustainability bond guidelines, external review guidelines, a whole range of things to look at and get deep into if you really need to. But these green bond principles don't really provide definitions. They provide a broad range of different categories that people can use if they're going to look at a green bond or a social bond or some sort of combination. So there's been this gap at the moment about what really is, say, green enough or social enough. Now, it's interesting because that's a long debate, and the challenge is that a lot of people in the investment community don't have a depth of knowledge about what is green or what's not quite green and what looks a bit greenish, brownish. So it's an interesting challenge for a lot of people in that community, and they're looking towards sets of definitions. What kind of things can be done? Now, it's important to realize that there's the types of assets that you can invest in. There's also a bit of a nuance about whether you can just use investments or you can also look to expenditures on things if you're buying green products or buying green electricity, for example. What about investments in the past? You know, can they be included? Yes, generally, up to a few years back, and even for refinancing of major infrastructure, it can go on for a long time. Present and future outlays are also great, but again, a lot of bonds don't generally finance, you know, higher risk activities, but that's fine. You know, the past, present, future investors are okay with all of that. There are some definitions and nuances, but they're very flexible instruments and flexible approaches. Now, the definitions we're seeing have all come together under this one word, taxonomy, which has sort of been chosen because it really is a scientific word to describe how we look at different things, how we categorize them, define them, put them in criteria. So everyone around the world is trying to create one of these. The Climate Bonds Initiative came up with one, I think, in 2014, which was very useful. And that then created a lot more momentum behind the level of detail you need. The European Union has created a very complex approach, which looks at many different sustainability objectives and looks at different types of assets, whether they're already green enough or they're transitioning, or perhaps they're enabling this green transition. So they've gone into a lot of complexity, and then they have an overlay of making sure there's no significant harm for any of these projects. So a very complex approach. The European investment community is trying to digest that right now and set up systems to do that properly. China, meanwhile, was one of the first to adopt a taxonomy. They call it a project catalogue. And that's been incredibly useful and is a much more sort of, I suppose, flat approach without these different dimensions like the EU approach. But I'm really interested to see what ASEAN will produce. And I think there's a lot of expertise around now. There's a lot of experience. And so hopefully it will not take very long to create a great product. Okay, we've had a bit of an exploration already about why people are doing this and what's good, what's bad. I'm not going to go too far into this, but investors really are happy to see that they can get this green exposure through bonds and loans and other sukuk and other things that they already understand. There isn't extra risk because of the green. It's the same credit, the same arrangements. And so they're comfortable to push into that because they don't have a lot of new product or new capital structuring or new credit structure risk. It's just about the labeling. So very interesting, and they enjoy the engagement with these companies. It's been quite interesting to hear investors say how much they enjoy the discussions, which aren't about credit, but are about more interesting things. Now, issuers and borrowers, of course, are really seeing a lot of benefits, but it does take some effort to get this done. It's not free and easy. You have to actually do some things. And so there's a good reason to think about what it is that the objectives are. Now, if your objective is to get investor diversification, you'll get it. If you're trying to get better investor engagement and stickiness, so to speak, where they hold onto your investment and don't trade it out, that's also very, very likely. You can get a better price, but mostly that's about supply and demand. And that's an interesting thing you have to be, cognizant about and choose a good advisor for the capital market timing and so on. But also labeling is a very clear and easy way to get much more attention. And if you want more attention from the market about the sustainability message, it's a great way forward. Now, that's the sort of high level view on definitions. I'm hoping that helps to put all these things in some sort of place and see how it works. There is a lot of detail now available about the process. And what the ADB has done is created a website called Asia Bonds Online, which I would recommend too. It's a great resource. But they've also got a green bonds section now. And within that section, there's a series of pages, fact sheets, which really work through every step of this and try and provide a lot of insights from the experience so far. So I would strongly recommend you go to that resource. If you can read through that resource, you'll have a very good idea of exactly what this requires. As you can see from this picture, there's a few phases. There's the sort of setup phase in the blue there. There's the auditing, I suppose, is the equivalent, or external review, they call it, in the red there. Then there's the media and marketing and the actual getting out there and making it happen. And of course, the last part, which is the follow through. So I don't have time today. We've run a big over time. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this process, but I would strongly recommend you look at this guidance. The future sessions we're going to go through in this workshop series will definitely dive further into some of these steps and provide some key insights. The sort of pictures and diagrams, all very colorful and fantastic. As you can see, there's a lot of detail here, a lot of checklists and stepwise things to look through, and sort of giving people a sense of what's important at each of those steps. Now, reporting and those things are very important as well. So I would strongly recommend you look at those sections. That is one of the areas that there is some tension at the moment between how much reporting issuers provide and how much they will in the future, and how much reporting investors want, or more specifically asset managers. So reporting is an interesting part right now. So just to finish off, a few quick lessons from the experience debate with labeling. There's been thousands of labeled instruments put out all over the world, whether it's market-based bonds or sukuk or private placements, all sorts of different things. And the experience is growing fantastically. 5 key things. If you want to label one of these instruments as an issuer, remember it's essentially a marketing tool. It should be aligned with other branding or messaging or other things you've already got going to have maximum effect. So it's essentially bringing the financing side into this broader branding or position you have in the market. So it's important to realize that. The second one is that transparency is essentially what investors want. The key difference in a lot of people's minds between traditional bonds and investments and what we see with these thematic or green labeled or labeled stuff is the extra transparency. There's more information about what they're thinking of doing or what their plans are. There's more information about how they view some of these broader challenges, and there's more engagement. And so that is one of the things that investors are looking for. They don't actually know whether that's good enough or good or bad transparency at this point. So it's still about being transparent and then figuring out how much they need or how much they want in terms of detail. This trend doesn't seem to be going away. I've been working in climate change since 2001, and I've seen a lot of money put to this, but not nearly the scale of money that we now see moving into this space every week. And so I think this trend is pretty prominent, and I think 2020 and the pandemic have really reinforced some of the motivations that are happening here in the investor universe. Now, when you issue a labeled bond or loan, you can get pricing benefit, and if you play it well, you can do that well. But other benefits for issuers really dominate, and so that expansion of exposure and more investors and different investors is a big part of what motivates issuers. And almost every treasurer I've spoken to after they've issued their first green bond has said, yes, 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 I want to do it again. And so something to just take from the people who are out there doing it. Thanks very much. I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to further workshops where we can explore a lot more of these interesting topics. Thanks so much.
And thank you so much, Rob, for that very comprehensive coverage. I hope that's given everybody a quick overview on definitions. May we now invite Mr. Sinen Matoto to moderate a short 5 to 10 minute Q&A session over this topic.
Thank you very much, Pam. And thank you, Commissioner F. and Rob, for your great presentations. Um, Already now, we already have quite a few questions on the Q&A, but let me sort of step back from some of those specific questions that have been raised and try to look at it on a much broader perspective, Rob. I couldn't help but be struck by one of your slides that made reference to the fact that the ASEAN investors relative to, I guess, the EU seem to be, I would say, not as significant in terms of volume. Why do you think is the case that, in fact, ASEAN's share of bond issuances have not really been all that great?
Thanks for the question. That's great. I suppose there's two factors there. One for me is that the bond markets themselves in ASEAN are not as large as the European and US markets, although China and Japan do have very large bond markets. ASEAN, not so much. South Korea, yes. So I think part of it is the starting point. There just isn't as much capital market sort of structured transaction at that level going through. And there's also the reality that investors in ASEAN have not been as struck by the sustainability bug that others in Europe and North America have. I mean, in Europe, it's been started by the Scandinavian investment community. They were really driving this early on, and it's been taken on by more and more. And now we see the European Commission looking to issue green bonds itself. So I think there's a few factors, but I'm very optimistic. I think ASEAN is an incredibly adaptable and dynamic situation. And when the writing's on the wall, it gets done. So I feel like it's going to be a very fast transition once that momentum is there and people understand. It's partly the understanding.
Could it also be perhaps related to the fact that the carbon emissions coming out of ASEAN relative to the West is not that great? So as a consequence, concern for sustainability issues, setting aside, of course, the climate issues, then become not as prominent.
I think that's interesting. I mean, the emissions challenges in Southeast Asia are dramatic. I mean, you look at forest loss in certain parts of Southeast Asia, you look at the coal that's burned already, but also the new build of coal that's going on. And if you go into China, and so the emissions are, I think, very large. I think part of it has been the reality of social development and development, economic development, taking center stage. But I think also people are realizing that you can't really have both for too long. You can't have dramatic economic growth without quite substantial damage. And I think that's where people are realizing, just looking out the window, something has to change. So I think it's an interesting time, very interesting time. As I say, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm excited about what's happening right now and in the next couple of years, particularly for my kids.
In terms of the investor base, we've, of course, seen the presentation of Commissioner F, and also your comment that, in fact, the investor base is so huge that it's not an issue of supply of money, it's more the demand of the issuers. I wonder, though, in terms of geographic specifics, to what extent would ASEAN market be interesting to the West, to the investors coming from the West, and more specifically to the Philippines, for example? Could you give us a feel for how that looks like?
Most certainly. My sense is that if you could create a product that international investors could digest, then it will be no problem at all to have it taken up. But to me, the gap is where how to get the products that the international investors are happy to digest at scale, and the alternative investments for them right now are very close to zero in terms of return if they're in Switzerland or Japan or anywhere like that. So if you can create a product that they can digest and it's doing the Philippines activities or ASEAN activities, that's where I think the ADBs structures and credit guarantees and other layers of evolution and innovation can really help. Because if you can unlock that gap between the products available now and what the international community can digest, if you can unlock that, the money just has ready to flow. And so to me, that's the challenge, is to get that centralized approach to really overcome that gap, whether it's currency, whether it's duration, whether it's some sort of credit guarantee to layer across the senior level. There's all sorts of different things will help different entities. But to me, that's if you can get it. I mean, if you can issue something in Switzerland in Swiss francs, you'll be swamped with demand. So yeah, that's my thought at the moment.
We'll talk about currencies. I wonder, is there any appetite for local currencies picked up by investors from the West, like a peso issued, peso denominated bond? Would that attract any interest at all?
It depends a little bit. I mean, the returns are dramatically different to what we're seeing in the Europe and North America. So the yield there is great, but the risk and the currency risk are very real. And a lot of the investors who have these green mandates don't have a lot of experience in emerging markets. So building that bridge is important. But there's also domestic investors in ASEAN to stimulate, and they already have the investment mandates for local currency and local investment products. So stimulating their activities is also a wonderful way to drive this demand.
Yeah. Well, shifting to Commissioner F, talking about local investors. Again, I think the observation is that the funding that is available in large amounts are really primarily international investors. And although, of course, you made reference to ATRAM, which is great news, but I would imagine that's primarily for equity type of investments. That's my guess. And we're really looking here at this, I guess, at this stage at debt. And for example, we've got institutional investors in our country like SSS, GSIS, insurance companies. I mean, are you aware of any initiatives on their part to try to promote and, in fact, announce the fact that they're looking particularly for ESG type of investments in instruments?
So to answer your question, if you notice in the slides that I showed earlier, even the onshore issuances do well. Pricing is tight, and many times they're multiple times oversubscribed in local currency. And we've talked to some of the issuers, and you'll see that some of the institutional investors, particularly institutional investors that are local country offices of international firms like Sun Life and Manulife, they already have a certain mandate coming from the head office to look for or prioritize green, social, and sustainable. Now, what you mentioned is the next stage, which I think is only beginning to happen, not only in the Philippines, but throughout ASEAN, which is domestic investors taking on ESG and climate as a kind of investment priority. And we don't see that yet in SSS and GSIS, but you'll take a note that the BSP itself, in that interview that I quoted Governor Jokno on, the BSP is actually invested $300 million in the Bank of International Settlements Green Fund. So it's coming from certain quarters already, but it's at a very early stage. It's at a very early stage here in ASEAN. And you'll also note that it's the formation of these kinds of domestic investment funds is a priority within ASEAN. That's why we're trying to come up with the ASEAN Sustainable Fund Standards. But again, I'd like to point out, I have to welcome the action by ATRAM of leading ahead of the curve and starting and launching a fund already. And I think that's already an indicator that there's demand. Otherwise, they wouldn't have launched the fund. So this is a trend that's just beginning, but as Rob is saying, it's a very real trend, I think, internationally.
Yeah.
Including in the Philippines.
Okay. Well, I guess we're all aware of our shortcomings in our local bond market. We all know that. In fact, I think that's the reason why we have all of these activities. And one of the recurring comments, of course, in so far as our local market is concerned, is really the high cost, or relatively high cost of issuing a capital market instrument relative to simply doing a bilateral type of a deal with a bank. And again, in some material that was provided, I'm not too sure if it was Rob or maybe it was from Paul, there was some reference to incentives provided by regulators in countries like Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, giving some sort of an incentive for first-time issuers. Because if you notice, the kind of issuers we've had in our history have really been the very big boys. You're talking about the Ayala Group, Aboitiz Group, the big banks. So beyond the handful of really these big names, we really don't have that ability to somehow attract or induce second-tier type of issuers, which number perhaps much more in terms of number, but aggregated, I'm sure will also, be equivalent to very large amounts of money if aggregated properly. So everything has to sort of jibe to make it interesting for them. And as I said, one of the recurring comments would be cost. Now, from the point of view of the SEC, is this something at all that is at all feasible or something that we could anticipate?
Yeah, I think the cost really is the cost that we need to address, and the cost that, and this is why we're doing this webinar with ADB, and why there's a series of webinars coming. It's really the tuition of learning how to do the bond. The actual cost of doing the bond, I'm sure I'd be interested to hear Rob's view on this. Our observation is the subsidy programs done by our neighbors, not particularly, not a lot of people actually make use of those subsidy programs, because in actual application, and this is true for Philippine issuers, as Rob said, when you see that this is part of your strategy and that it is a successful way of doing funds, the actual quote unquote additional cost of accessing those funds is minuscule compared to the funds that you raise and the pricing that you might get from tapping this market. What we believe is a bigger hindrance is many of these mid-tier companies do not know how to tap the market or are not able to access the kind of investment advice necessary to be able to access these markets. And this is the reason why we're very supportive of this series of webinars by ADB, because the idea is to provide this information, how to structure your bond in detail, how to come up with a sustainable framework within your company that will be acceptable to investors, whether local or foreign. This is the kind of knowledge that is not yet widespread and is at the moment being accessed only, as you said, being by only the top tier. So this whole exercise is trying to democratize access to that information so that mid-tier companies have the same know-how. And as we said, again, as we tried to demonstrate a while ago in our presentation, even small companies can successfully issue a green bond and be 2 times, 3 times oversubscribed because the interest is there. But they need to know how.
Yeah. Well, I think to go back to my earlier point, Commissioner F, I think we also need, some push on the part of perhaps government to encourage our institutional investors that are particularly government linked. I'm talking about the likes of GSIS or somebody like an SSS to sort of suggest that, that they'd be very much open to funding deals, bonds that particularly have a slant towards ESG. And in fact, not only funding it, but perhaps providing certain motivation by way of either a tighter spread or whatever. I mean, in fact, even the BSP, you made reference to BSP. Of course, the BSPs come up with their sustainable finance framework that gives banks 3 years to sort of transition. But it will be interesting if BSP could also include in that package, for example, eligibility for compliance for agri purposes or SME purposes, loans that they provide to companies that provided by banks to companies that in fact are consistent with ESG. This is a thought. All I'm trying to suggest is that perhaps we should really get other organizations like, into this whole loop.
Right. On the agri front, I think you'll find that BSP already has legislation in Congress. I think it's being sponsored by Congressman Kua in order to broaden the allowable investments under the agri law. And I think you'll find considerations of climate and sustainability, which has direct impacts not only on our farmers, but the whole value chain, being able to you can't transport palay or maize from northern or central Luzon to Manila if your roads are flooded. So I think these are things that are actually moving already in Congress.
Okay, I just got a note that we have to move on to the next speakers, and I do see that there are quite a few questions. Don't worry, we'll cover those other questions in the second round of Q&A. So I hope Rob, Commissioner F, you could sort of stay on just in case some questions will be directed to you. Thank you. Would you like to take over?
Sure. Thanks so much, Bing. All right. Thank you so much to our speakers. Let's move on to the next part of our program. We'll call on Mr. Cosing Pongsopol and Mr. Richard Supangan for next part of our program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thanks.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. Let me share my screen first. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone again. I am Richard Uriki, and I will be co-presenting with Kun Pok, who is the lead officer of the technical assistance on green bonds. We from the ADB would like to express our gratitude for giving us this opportunity to present our undertakings, which we hope would supplement this stimulating exchange of knowledge. So let me start by providing a quick background. As you know, the Asian crisis, including the Philippines, were heavily affected by the Asian financial crisis in 1997. So in response to this crisis, the 13 finance ministers and central bank governors of ASEAN Plus 3, so ASEAN Plus 3 being the 10 ASEAN countries, and the Plus 3, the People's Republic of China, and Japan and the Republic of Korea, established the Asian Bond Markets Initiative, or ABMI, in 2003 to develop the local currency bond markets in the region, which you would see at the top portion of the chart. And our team in ADB serves as the secretariat to ABMI. At the bottom, you would see green boxes that refer to the different task forces of ABMI. So Task Force 1, or TF1, is on supply of local currency denominated bonds in the region. TF2 is on demand, TF3 is on regulations, and TF4 is on infrastructure. Let me just mention that the technical assistance on green bonds is under TF1, which is being co-chaired by the People's Republic of China and Thailand. Also down below, CGIF, or the Credit Guarantee and Investment Facility, is also under TF1, and there will be another presentation on this later. It is important to note that the ABMI is guided by the medium-term roadmap, which was endorsed by ASEAN Plus 3 finance ministers and central bank governors in 2019. And the roadmap also calls for the development of the green bond markets for infrastructure development. Okay, so the technical assistance, or the TA, I would call it TA, on creating systems for green local currency bonds for infrastructure development in ASEAN Plus 3 was approved just last year and will be implemented until early next year, thanks to the government of the People's Republic of China for providing funding support as well as technical support on this TA. Just for your information, when this TA was approved last year, the original idea was only to focus on green bonds, but given the COVID pandemic and the greater demand for social bonds, we later expanded the TA to also cover social and sustainability bonds. So that is why we now have the entire lot. So as you can see here, there are three core areas of the TA. First is on the supply side. We know that there are many issuers who are also very keen to issue green, social, or sustainability bonds, but they do not know how to commence the process. So this TA will guide potential issuers with the issuance process, starting with the identification of eligible assets that meet the requirements of either the international and or the regional standards. The team, the secretariat team, could also assist potential issuers through the development of either a green, social, or sustainability bond framework. So we hope that the framework can be reused for successive issuances as we encourage issuers to issue a series of thematic bonds to help develop the market in the Philippines. And just for your information, this TA has also supported the domestic credit rating agencies in Asia to become approved verifiers. So far in ASEAN, two were accredited by CBI, one from Malaysia, RAM Sustainalytics, and the other one from Thailand, TRIS Ratings. But we will continue to collaborate with these verifiers and potential verifiers to scale up green finance. And we do hope that we have an approved local green bond verifier in the Philippines in the near future. Another constraint is on the lack of awareness of thematic bonds in the region. That is why we have this webinar to address this constraint and promote thematic bond market in the region. Attorney Dick already mentioned that there would be a series of workshops targeted at various stakeholders that would be organized throughout the year for the Philippine market. So we look forward to that one. The second is on demand. This is to promote more demand for local currency green bonds. We have partnered with the Asian Bonds Online, or ABO, as it is well known in the international investing communities, as the one-stop source for ASEAN +3 bond market information and data. So Rob earlier discussed the detailed guidelines and key considerations for issuing a successful green bond. So we do encourage you to also check the Asian Bonds Online website, particularly the Green Bond webpage. Also, we can explore the feasibility of establishing the ASEAN +3 Sustainable Bonds Exchange Traded Fund and the ASEAN +3 Sustainable Bonds Index. And the last area, we hope that the ASEAN and ASEAN +3 can collectively make their Asian voices heard in international discussion through initiatives such as the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, or ACMF, ASEAN Working Committee on Capital Market Development, and others. Given ADB's work on green bonds, ADB became an observer to the Network for Greening the Financial Systems, or NGFS, in June last year. We also do hope to collaborate with central banks and regulators, being the members of NGFS in Asia, to contribute to the NGFS discussion, taking into account the level of market development and regulatory environment in Asia. And we also do hope to document specific cases, such as the issuance process and the issuer's experience issuing thematic bonds, so that by the end of the TA next year, we also do hope to publish a report on good practices in issuing these thematic bonds. And lastly, we also do hope to leverage on other initiatives under ABMI, one of which is we promote the ASEAN +3 multi-currency bond issuance framework, or what we call the AMBIF, to help issuers to issue bonds that are targeted at professional investors in participating countries using their local currencies. So we do hope that AMBIF can also be used for thematic bond issuances as well. And down below, you would see some relevant links about the ASEAN +3 bond market guide and also on the Asian Bonds Online. Okay, so these are the standards that we are hoping to promote under our TA. So we have the Green Bond Principles by ICMA, the Climate Bond Standards of the Climate Bond Initiative, or CBI, as well as the ASEAN Green Bond Standards of the ACMF. As you very well know, Commissioner Amatong has been leading the work on sustainable finance on ACMF, and as Commissioner Amatong presented earlier, ACMF has actually developed the ASEAN Green, Social, and Sustainability Bond Standards a few years ago, which was also supported by the ADB. So when ADB provides technical support to the issuers, we would strongly encourage the issuers to at least comply with the ASEAN Green, Social, or Sustainability Bond Standards. Okay, so this survey was done by CBI, the Green Bond Treasurer Survey, wherein institutions shared their experiences of issuing green bonds with I think about 10% of the respondents coming from Asia. So just to highlight the key findings, so 98% of the respondents said that their green bond attracted new investors, so almost 100%. And more than 90% or 91% of the respondents said a green bond facilitated more engagement with the investors. So regarding reputation and visibility, all of them see that they have actually opened to new business, and almost 90% said that they plan to issue even more green bonds. Even though there are additional costs to issue green bonds, such as costs related to setting up the internal controls and engagement of the external reviewers, about 84% said that these additional costs actually can be seen as negligible or valid, as the benefits of issuing green bonds are so great. So these are the major findings and benefits of issuing green bonds based on the survey done by CBI. Let me turn you over to Pok to continue with the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Ricky, can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, given the strong support from the Philippines governments and the regulators, and you might be wondering, how does the Philippines performing against the other ASEAN countries? So, if you can see on the image on the right hand side, we see that the Philippines is well advanced than other ASEAN countries in terms of green bond issuances. This is the data as of December last year. And this is, this achievement is even without subsidies from the governments. So we have seen almost $3 billion cumulative issuances. And the Philippines is only ranked behind Singapore and Indonesia. But as you all know, Indonesia, was largely issued by the governments, the sovereign green sukuk. However, it's 3 billion on this image looks quite a good number, quite an impressive number. But if we compare this to the overall size of the Philippines bond market, which is about more than $200 billion. So 3 billion is only about 1% of it, right? So there are a lot of room to grow, and we hope that our TA support as well as other facilities that ADB can provide, which Karthik and Anush will explain in their presentation, can actually play a crucial role in creating greater awareness among the local stakeholders, and also to provide hand-on and hand-holding support to the local issuers in the Philippines. Next slide, please. And Ricky mentioned about our technical assistance program. And of course, there are some preconditions, that the issuers need to consider. And the first one is that let's focus on the left-hand side. I would say that as ABMI, the ASEAN Plus 3 Asian Bond Markets Initiative mandate is to support local currency bond market development. The ABMI was set up by the ASEAN Plus 3 finance ministers and central bank governors to address the maturity and currency mismatch as the result of the 1997 financial crisis. That's why the authorities were very keen to develop the local currency bond market. Therefore, our TA support can only support corporate issuers who want to issue any kind of thematic bonds in Philippine pesos or any currencies of other ASEAN Plus 3 markets. For example, there could be some corporates who want to expand their business from the Philippines to Vietnam or coming to Thailand and would like to issue the local currency bonds to avoid any foreign exchange risk. So the issuance of the Vietnamese dong or Thai baht bond is also possible, and this is something that can be supported by the TA as well. And secondly, the bond must at least align with the ASEAN Green, Social or Sustainability Bond Standards of the ACMF or the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum that Ricky mentioned, and also as Commissioner Amatong mentioned in his slides as well. Also, we also allow for the alignment with other international standards, such as the climate bond standards and all the ICMA green, social, and sustainability bond principles as well. And third, the issuers must sort of demonstrate willingness to issue thematic bonds on a regular basis. As I said, the framework can be used multiple times. So we hope to, we hope that the issuers will continue to issue several thematic bonds after the first issuance, right? As you know, the most difficult part to issue the bond is, always involves the issuance for the first time, right? For the first issuance, you need to identify the eligible assets or the projects. You need to draft the framework. You need to prepare internal systems to track the allocation on the use of proceeds, as well as the post-issuance reporting requirements. So the issuing the bond for the first time is often more difficult. That's why ADB or ACGF and CGIF are there to support you. But of course, we would like to also help the Philippines to create the market. We need to expand the issuers base. We need to expand the investors base. That's why we would encourage the issuers who would want to come to us have to show some sort of commitment that they will be issuing the thematic bonds on a regular basis, even after our support. And also the last condition is that the issuers must be willing to share their experience in issuing the bonds. As I said, there are lots of things that need to be done before the first bond can be issued. And also, as Rob highlighted in his presentation on the 4 key principles of the thematic bond standards or the framework. I mean, those kind of experience, we feel that it's very useful, and not just for the issuers themselves, but we also need to promote the information sharing or experience sharing, as Dick also mentioned in her welcome remarks. So we hope to document your experience and make it as a study report that we can share with the other stakeholders or other potential issuers. As ABMI, as ADB Secretariat, we need to, we are accountable to the ASEAN Pacific governments. So these documents will also be shared with the finance ministers or the finance secretary, and also the governors of the ASEAN Pacific central banks as well. Of course, this is only focused on the experience in issuing thematic bonds. We're not going to touch any sensitive or confidential information of the issuers. And given that the TA fund is limited, I need to be honest that we cannot support all the issuers. So if you feel that you would like the support from the ADB, please feel free to get in touch with us as early as possible. So when it comes to our support, we would like to work with the issuers or the underwriters from the very beginning of the process. So if there's any doubts or any questions about what are the eligible assets or the projects, and whether these activities, these projects are aligned with international or the regional standards, please feel free to contact us. And also we will help you to confirm your internal and also internal process and controls, and also to help review the draft framework as well. Given that, let me emphasize this on a little bit more, because the framework is the issuers framework. So we feel that the issuers themselves will be in the best position to prepare the framework. But as an ADB, as our technical support, we are happy to review that for you and to make sure that the framework is good, before submission to the external reviewers. And of course, to some extent, we are happy to engage and also to manage the external review process with the external reviewers as well. And this was the point that Commissioner Amatong just mentioned just now, that there are many mid-size or even smaller size issuers who would want to issue this kind of thematic bonds, but they don't know where to start, they don't know what to do. That's why we are here to help. And if necessary, in certain cases, we are happy to discuss how we can support the external review fees as well. And also, as Ricky mentioned, other than supporting the issuers and the underwriters, we hope to develop the overall ecosystems for the Philippines. And if you feel that there are other initiatives that we should focus on in the Philippines, please feel free to contact us. As Ricky mentioned, we have already supported the first 2 local verifiers in Thailand and Malaysia. In Thailand, this is quite important because most of the companies, we don't use English in our day-to-day communication. So most of the conversation, contracts and documents are in Thai. So having a local verifier will actually help the companies to issue the bonds instead of having to translate those documents into English. That is time consuming and it's more costly as well. So hopefully having someone on the ground in the Philippines to work closely with all the potential issuers in the Philippines will actually help expand the sustainable finance market in the Philippines. So we hope to provide technical support on that. And just before I end, let me also take this opportunity to emphasize, next slide please, Ricky, the importance of having a well-functioning local currency bond market. As you can see in the blue line, the size of the local currency bond market continued to rise, especially in Q2 and Q3 last year, as governments continue to issue sovereign debt to finance economic relief measures in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. And also, as you can see, government's bond market continue to dominate the region's bond market, accounting for almost 60% of the ASEAN bond markets as of September last year. And the local currency bonds remain the predominant financing options, accounting for about 80% of the bond outstanding. So this actually indicates the importance of local currency bond financing in the fundraising effort to both the corporate and the governments. And next slide, please. And this is also true, for fundraising for thematic or sustainable bond issuers as well. As you can see, about 40% of the region's green bonds were issued in local currencies of ASEAN, while more than 50% of the sustainability bonds were issued also in local currencies, including the Maiden sustainability bond issued by the Thai government last year, in which I'm sure Karthik will elaborate more in his presentation. Next slide, please, Ricky. But, a big but, the size of the ASEAN thematic bonds is extremely small as compared to the other, as compared to the size of the local currency bond market in general. As I said, in the Philippines, it's also around 1% of the total market size. Therefore, we need to lots of more work need to be done to promote more awareness on the impact of climate change, and also how all the stakeholders, especially yourself, everyone here joining the workshop, can voluntarily contribute to creating positive environmental and social impacts. And next slide, please. This is just the image of the Asian Bonds online website that Rob discussed in his presentation, and also in Ricky's discussion earlier as well. So if you go to the Asian Bonds online website, you can see the tab on the right-hand side, which is on green bonds. Next slide, please. And it has all the detailed guidance on what the issuers or the underwriters need to know about the issuance process. So, and also, next slide, please. We hope to use this platform to promote the Philippines capital market to the global investors as well. So lastly, if you have any questions or if you would like to discuss how ADB can provide technical support, please feel free to reach out to any of us in this slide, and we'll be happy to circulate this slide after the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khun Pok, and thank you, Ricky. Let us now move on to Mr. Karthik Iyer, ACGF consultant, to find out a bit more on what are the enhancements that can be provided for the GSSBs.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just checking if you can hear me.
Loud and clear. Thanks, Karthik.
Excellent. Apologies if there's any connection issues, which is why I requested that my slides be shared from your end. My name is Karthik Iyer. So I work in the ACGF team, as you can see the full form in there. So that's the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which operates under the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, which is owned and operated by the ASEAN 10 countries. And the fund is administered by ADB. I think the key word there is catalytic. So the idea here is that how can we help projects and entities embark on green ventures, and thereafter how ADB through technical assistance and funding can support those projects. So I've got about 10 slides split between the first half, just explaining what the ACGF concept is. So what you've heard before has been on the bonds, but I think many of the previous speakers have made some excellent points. And what I'll probably talk to is how that support can be provided, especially for entities that are going to the market for the first time, as Paul outlined. So the mission of the ACGF is to accelerate. So again, the key word here is accelerate. Yes, green finance is mainstreaming and sustainable finance as well, as Rob outlined, it's here to stay. But how do we now accelerate so that both the size, the scale, and the pace is increased? Because quite honestly, we don't have enough time if we want to achieve all the targets, either set by Paris Agreement or net zero aspirations. So the focus again also is on infrastructure, because that's where the biggest amount of change can happen, and how we can look at bankable projects that are viable, but also try and draw in other capital in terms of private capital to make it scalable as well as long-term. Next slide, please. There's some stats on this slide. So just to give you a highlight of what we've been doing. So the history so far has been, it's about 2 years since this was created. So it's actually a window within the AIF. So although ADB has been funding, this is a separate green window under that. The 3 key points which you can see on the left is essentially what we're looking at is technical assistance for structuring green financing structures. Obviously, I'll be focusing on bonds in this session, but I'll give you a flavor of some of the other stuff. De-risking funds, so that how we can increase or give credit enhancement for projects and entities. And the third part is sessions like this, where it's knowledge and capacity building. I'll use some examples where you can see where it's happening live, some of which is now public, so I can share with you some of the details. And on the right side is some key stats. The main things to note, rather than getting lost in that, is that there's about 1.4 billion pledged towards this. And that's a combination of ACGF, but also working closely with many of our partners who are keen to support us. Some of the names I'll read out: AFD, KfW in Germany, the Korean government, EIB, and we're also in talks with many others like the GCF, where they're very keen to create this or expand or enhance this green window and to work closely with us to support the countries in the ASEAN region. We can come back to that in the questions because I'm conscious of time, and I want to give you the highlights and then loop back as necessary. Next slide, please. So a key part of the mechanics of the ACGF is the eligibility criteria. You've obviously heard about what we talked earlier by many of the speakers about standards and taxonomy. So the ACGF operates its own criteria, which draws on what Climate Bonds has done, sort of best of all worlds, but attuned to what the region needs and looking at how we would qualify projects as green and how the contribution to environmental objectives is achieved. So there's the green part, there's also the wider environmental in terms of biodiversity and other aspects, as well as a priority is given in terms of additional funding or concession finance where it is a priority green sectors. And again, we can share the link of this with you separately. We can look at the eligibility criteria, which goes sector by sector, not too dissimilar from what CBI taxonomy and others do in ICMA and the principles. But obviously, we're going down to a deeper level at a project level. And in many ways, if you want to think about it, as I'll link this to the bond picture, is that the use of proceeds underneath the bond obviously are these projects or assets. So ACGF, we are in a position where we're looking at those underlying projects to make them green. But then when the financing avenue is coming from above in terms of bond, it could be a loan, it could be anything else, but when it's coming from a bond, then we're matching those two to say the framework says this is what the definition of green is. The projects here are green, so you can match the pipeline to the bond and the end investors eventually. So that's just giving you an idea of the value chain and how the framework criteria we've created is applied and then links into financing access. Next slide. Thank you. As has been mentioned by many speakers before me, and I think evidence for us in the real life, how the world has changed since COVID. So while we're using the word green, I'm using it in the maximum umbrella possible in terms of what it includes. So anything green now in the flavor, looking at the lens from a recovery point of view, goes beyond just the green. So we're looking at jobs, we're looking at how the recovery and the rejuvenation of countries and region needs to be attended to. So in many ways, the finance and instruments that we will be looking at, and some of the examples I'll share, are looking beyond just green, because it's almost impossible now not to link it with social aspects. whether that be jobs or education or health, health being a key thing now because of the current pandemic. But the way things are going, that's going to become mainstream. And so we will talk a bit more about that. Some stats in that in terms of the impact of COVID and how economies are expected or are contracting. So the key outcome of that is going to be not only the need for recovery, but also strained funding mechanisms. The governments are going to be strained because of immediate reaction to how they recoup the economy, as can be seen across the world. But at the same time, we need to make sure that any recovery and building back better, as it's been called these days, incorporates the green element so that we don't sacrifice a very speedy turnaround and recovery by forsaking the green and sustainable aspects. If you need to read more again, there was a book which we've co-authored and it's part of our team. I've given you a screenshot, and again, the link's been provided, which is called a Green Recovery Paper, post-COVID specifically, and it also looks at different mechanisms, including bonds. Next slide, please. So now I come to the section where we will talk about bonds in drawing out what we're doing on a case-by-case basis, so we can share some of those experiences. So many of the conceptual stuff which we shared earlier by the other speakers, I can share with you in terms of how that's actually come to play. So what's happened in that space from the end of 2019 towards 2020, literally an intense period of 6 to 8 months, has been a plethora of these social and COVID-related bonds, but incorporating green as well. So sustainable as the broader thematic is called. So apart from the projects, funding and credit enhancements and de-risking we're doing, there's a lot of work we've been doing, and I've been specifically working on with some of the sovereigns. So we work very closely with sovereign and sovereign-backed only, not private sector. And one of the key ones I would like to call out, which is there, is the Thai sovereign bond, probably among the first to have a sustainable sovereign bond, but also combining green and COVID elements. So we spent a lot of time looking at the framework, as Spock and the others referred to, in terms of defining that and designing that. So they have issued the bonds. They've actually issued 2 taps of the same bonds. There's been a second tap in the market since then, and there's more to come. Initial investment has been in the MRT, the electric line in Bangkok. And then another part of it has been for COVID in terms of cash disbursements for people affected by the COVID in terms of unemployment. But the framework is much broader than that. There are other sectors looking at green buildings, sustainable land use, education, health, obviously, and housing. So this is actually this is one of the key things to understand also, is that what Thailand has done is that looked at it as a bond program. So this is where it goes to a point where it goes beyond a transaction to a long view of a strategy. So it's part of a 100 billion Thai baht program, of which 50 billion has already been issued. And again, as of yesterday, they've just released the interim report showing their impact report for what's already been issued, which again, ADB has been heavily involved with. So it's been an exciting project to actually see this happen in real life, right from sort of the get-go through to the impact reporting. And we're also working with them on how do they select their project in the selection process of what really is green. Reference was made to say how green is green, how do we look at things which can be qualified as green, and how does it also align with the country's priorities so that those two come together. A similar example in Indonesia we're working with, a state-owned enterprise. Again, that's still not launched. And there again, we're going through some detailed asset selection process of what can be structured under those bonds, whether that can be a green-only bond, a sustainable, as well as transition. Because many of these examples we're working on is in places like utilities, where they have to have a pathway to wean off coal and go into renewables, or have a pathway to say that we're going halfway by going to hybrid, diesel replacement. So that kind of story and narrative needs to be built. Third example, quickly on this one, so that we've covered it all in one go, is again a live case. It's already been issued, and again we're going into a second round of issuance. Is the National Housing Authority in Thailand, where it is very different because we always talk about green, and this was purely social. And we sat down with them and looked at, in this case, affordable housing. What exactly are the social elements involved in that in terms of low-income owners having good housing, how housing can be decongested by having very specifically designed housing areas. So there's, again, a COVID angle there to avoid to provide social distancing. And they're now in the process of looking at how that can now incorporate a green element so that socially also becomes sustainable. So those are the kind of conversations we are having from a technical assistance point of view, as well as providing some insight on the projects underneath, and then also walking through all the way to how they go to the market with their bankers, or if we work with partners, we can get them on a journey through to that. So obviously what we'd love to do is replicate this with other countries, and that conversations are already happening. And definitely for Philippines, I think reference was made to a lot of the sectors and needs in Philippines in terms of oceans and blue and fisheries, especially, which is a big part of the ecosystem. And the last one is how do we broaden this? We would like to then go one step further. So we've gone from sovereign SOEs, but also look at local governments, municipalities, and cities, where a lot of these things come into focus. For example, whether it's waste management or smart cities, smart grids. So how can we deepen this, apart from just broadening it as well as a key part, because that's where the supply side, in many ways, I think there was a discussion earlier about, are the investors interested? Have we got enough to show them? And what depth are we providing by a rich capital market as more and more of these bonds come? Next slide. So I probably covered this very quickly so that we had some time. So I've mentioned some of the key examples there, and also give you an idea of the areas of support. So on the right side, what are the key play areas we're involved in? So green framework and taxonomy for selecting investments, structuring the bankable projects, supporting sovereign and thematic, and specifically now, big focus on green COVID recovery, which has become prominent, not just from our supporting, but actually people are coming with an ask specifically for that, because this is here to stay, as was mentioned by other speakers. Next slide, please. This is probably a bit more general. I think there have been some questions, and again, happy to come back at the Q&A time, but I thought I'll share this in terms of what's happening, and it may speak to some of the questions raised earlier. Again, Climate Bonds, who I do spend some time with and realize on the board, has done some surveys on it in terms of what's the perception matching between what the investors want and what they're getting in the current market. And as you can see that the current green bond market started with development banks, financial corporates, and then sovereigns at the bottom. But what the investors are looking for, both from a yield point of view and where they are mandated green investors who want to see actual impact, is that they want to see the sovereigns go up the chain, partly because of the yields. But the second part, I think, is also because by leading by example, sovereigns can play a role in creating a local market, which is as important as having international access. So I'll let that sink in, so that as you can see, there is a mismatch, which is a starting point, but obviously we need to then see how that mismatch is corrected, and that will automatically facilitate the flow of funds in a way that, look, if that's what they're asking for, let's give them that, and those two come together. Next slide. This is sort of similar, but a different angle of what people are looking for. So if you look back, what's happened is that it's been the usual suspects, as I call it, the pure play. Look, there's a solar plant, there's a wind farm, we know they agree, but there's a demand now to say, look, we need more sector diversity, as in, look, if everybody starts looking in a green way, then there'll be a big change in what's happening with the planet. So some of the new sectors that are coming on board are industrials. By industrials, I mean like steel, cement. How do we actually make sure that these kind of industry actually get on a pathway to become green? And some of that might be a transition pathway as opposed to pure green, purely because the technology hasn't caught up. So I can't do hydrogen until the full electrolysis technology is in place, but at least I can start a pathway towards that and start getting step change from one step to the other. And some of the top bond issues right now are energy and materials sector. By materials, we're talking about ores, lithium ore, and so on. And they haven't issued green bonds. How do we get them all on the bandwagon, so to speak, but also at the same time make sure that it's not at a transaction level to say, hey, I'm just in a green bond, great, I can raise money. Is that, no, this is part of a program because there's more coming, because we're getting away from sort of fossil fuel or high emitting extractive technologies, but we're changing the world. If you take the other extreme, it's airlines, right? So how do we get to a point that the technology, at a point at least, where they go from hybrid fuels to biofuels, and airlines one day does get to a point where we can actually talk about them as potentially green. So that's just a sectoral view of how the market can be matched and how the market is growing and what we're hearing from investors as part of both ACGF's support with issuers, but also when we get feedback on the issuances. And happy to again share many of these stories with you. Next slide, I've just summarized some of the key themes. And obviously this is ongoing and we'll learn more together as countries and issuers. So focus on social and sustainable, that's already been said, especially if you look at the stats in the first half of 2020, a dramatic increase in social and sustainable. But then at the end of 2020, the green picked up again, which reflects exactly the sentiment of the market in terms of the pandemic, as well as we got closer to the vaccine and the need for a greener recovery. Big push on standardization and harmonization. So the one thing is, yes, we need to create taxonomies and understanding at different parts of the world. But the other side of the coin is that just keep in mind that if I'm an investor, I don't want to be in a point where I'm confused that, hang on, that's green in Colombia and that's green in Philippines. I'm a bit confused. I'll just go for the one which is clearer to me and put my money there. So how do we get to that balance that, yes, we have taxonomies, but actually overall, there's enough visibility and granularity for the investor to say that, yeah, I'm fine with that. I've got enough comfort that I can invest in that project in this country. Alignment to Paris Agreement, SDG goals will become more. As with, I think Rob mentioned transition bonds, where the guidance note, which came out by December, saying that, yes, you can have a transition label where you're promoting and you're saying that you have a pledge for a pathway, but it has to be aligned to a science-based target. And there are in the markets other, which are science-based target initiative, the transition pathway initiatives. So everything needs to be anchored with something. And interestingly, they're saying, or the general sentiment is that you can't just tag it to your NDCs because maybe the NDCs are not aspirational enough or stricter enough. So there needs to be a science-based alignment to that. So those are becoming more and more as countries are committing to net zero, and COP is coming on the horizon. So there's a lot of attention on that. The other point, which is I'm sort of interacting with a lot with the issuers right now, is the post-issuance. There's a lot of focus on getting the bond issued. How do we go through the process framework, as Bob said and Rob said, there's a lot of work to be done. But equal attention needs to be placed on post-issuance reporting, because that's where the investors are looking, okay, fine, that's great. Can I see what impact has happened? How are you articulating that? How are you presenting that in your impact report? Like the one which is just published yesterday by Thailand, is as important, because this is a journey investors are going in, just like they go with a company. I'm interested in this company. What else are they going to do in the future? Not just this bond. What is happening going forward as part of a longer program? Sovereign debt we touched on. Yes, there's a lot of demand for that, for yield, as well as signaling reasons. There'll still be some debate and head scratching, but things will settle down in terms of the newer labels and thematics that are coming in, transitions being a case in point, and who knows what will come next. When the first green bond came in, there were always a lot of debates. That's embedded as a mainstream market now. Socials come in, and thanks to COVID, that's embedded. But then, new themes will come in, and we just need to be aware of that. So there's just a smattering of some of the key themes and call-outs based on what the market's saying, as well as what we've seen and heard. I'm on my last slide now. You'll be happy to hear, so that we can get best use of our time and also come back for Q&A. If we can go to the next slide, sorry. So just to sum up, so what we said earlier was that the ACGF and the AIF is de-risking, providing technical support as well as knowledge and capacity. But if you look at it end to end, what we're doing now, yes, we're doing thematic bond support and capital market access, but in doing so with these governments, we're also looking at how their green policy can be supported with our TA as well as grant funding or blended finance funding, and ideally enabling, where we can, some kind of green finance facility which has a home beyond just a bond. So taking it from a transaction level to the strategy level, and where we can come in and say, look, we can provide de-risking, credit enhancements, also more importantly, leverage funding from other partners beyond just public sector, because private sector has to play a big role, because alone public sector can't do it to achieve the scale and speed I referred to at the beginning. So that's it to me. For me, sorry, I went quite speedily because I'm conscious that we are running a bit late, but I'll welcome any questions when we get to at the end of the session and for the panel. The last slide has my contact details and Anuj, our team lead. So you feel free to reach out at any point in time. And as Bob said, we're here to support. And if it's for the right cause and it fits all the criteria, we'll be happy to go through end to end with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirti. And that's a very good point. It has to be a view that's beyond just a transaction, but moving into strategy. Now, may we call on Mr. Anuj Awasthi, Vice President for Operations of the CGIF?
Yeah, hi. I try to keep it as short as possible. Was somebody handling the presentation for me, or do I need to upload it? Hello?
Hello. All right. I think we can ask our staff.
Oh, I can share it. It's fine. I can share it. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Cool. That's
It's
fine.
being shared now, Anuj.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. So CGIF and sustainable finance. So of all the discussions we've had till now, I think we thought we'd keep it a bit different, keep it short, simple, and tell you what we do and what our mandate is, because we are a relatively simple organization to understand. So I'll focus on that. Can I go to the next slide, please? So yeah, so our presentation will mainly be on 4 to 5 bullet points. One is I'm going to discuss about CGIF. We'll discuss about what we've done in the renewable energy space. We'll also discuss about what we've done in the microfinance space, because we consider that to be, as has been explained by a lot of other panelists, that it's a part of sustainable financing. We can also talk a brief about what we are doing today in that field, because I can give you a glimpse of our pipeline, though it's pan-ASEAN, but we would love to have similar transactions coming up in the Philippines. And we can discuss about what we've done till now in terms of the other supported transactions. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah. So CGIF is, in terms of our legal structure, we are a trust fund set up under the Asian Development Bank. We've been set up by the governments of ASEAN +3 would be China, Japan, and Korea, along with the Asian Development Bank. Each of the countries and even the ADB have contributed to our total equity capital of $1.2 billion. We were established in November 2010. We've been in operation for over 10 years. And we just have one single objective as an organization, which is to develop the capital markets in the ASEAN +3 region. That essentially means that the main operation for us as of now is guaranteeing bonds issued in ASEAN +3 currencies. We cannot support any bond issuance in hard currencies. We cannot support any bond issuance in currencies, or even if there's an economic benefit coming to region outside of ASEAN +3, it's difficult for us to support that. In terms of rating, because of our capital standing and the fact that we run quite a conservative leverage, we've been given a AA rating by Standard & Poor's globally. We also have ratings from a lot of local rating agencies. So we've got a AAA rating in Malaysia. We've got AAA rating in almost all the countries we work in. So if you look at the Pan-ASEAN region, I think we are rated AAA everywhere except for Singapore, which being a AAA country. So all our bonds which we get support in that jurisdiction end up getting a AA rating. Next slide, please. So what we do in terms of issuance, our guarantees which we issue are irrevocable and unconditional. We cover all non-payment events. What this essentially means is that if there is a non-payment event which takes place, then CGIF just steps in and pays the investors on behalf of the issuer, which makes it quite robust as a mechanism. We do not ask for any proof of default, or we do not ask for any proof that monies have not been paid by the issuer. We just need to, if the bondholder agent tells us there's been a default or a delay in payment, then they can send us a notice and we pay. CGIF guarantees up to 100% of principal and interest payments. That's what we've done till now. But in certain markets like Thailand, which are more developed, we are even looking at partial guarantees where we can actually provide. So if there are certain companies which are at the borderline of investment grade rating and just need to cross the rating cliff, CGIF is more than happy to provide that kind of support. So that if that can be achieved with a partial guarantee, we are very happy to consider that. CGIF retains the right to accelerate payment claims. That essentially means that if there is a call on the guarantee, CGIF will decide if the bond holders would be paid today or we would just maintain the regular payments of coupon and principal and pay as and when it was scheduled with the bondholders. Essentially, this means this is more in line with how we manage our capital, not to do with anything else, and that just gives us a bit more flexibility. In terms of specifics to Philippines, from an investor perspective, because we are classified as a multilateral agency, the investors get some regulatory reliefs, like the issuers are excluded from the single borrower limits. If the investor has invested to a bank which is invested in a bond, say issued by the Ayala Corporation, and the CGIF guaranteed, then they do not need to mark limits on Ayala. It will more be CGIF. There's a 20% risk weight vis-a-vis 100% risk weight for a corporate bond, and we are excluded from the limit, the DOS3 limit also. So I think that makes a big difference when it comes to capital allocation on bonds. So Philippines is one of the few countries which has given us all these regulatory reliefs. We're still talking to a few other governments in ASEAN, but Philippines has been a bit more proactive on this. Next slide, please. In terms of eligibility criteria, very simple. It's because our contributors are from ASEAN +3, we only focus on companies from this region. We have certain internal risk models, and we do believe that all companies we lend to should have an acceptable risk profile. The bond proceeds should not be used for prohibited activities. This is in line with ADB's standards. And yeah, so most of the companies we deal with do not do things like arms production, alcoholic beverages, and all that. We do follow environment and social safeguard standards very closely. We have, I would say, taken guidance from ADB for the same. And because we're a trust fund of ADB, we need to comply with similar environment and social safeguards as ADB does. And then we also always look out for a developmental justification when we look at supporting certain issuers. First-time issuers, overcoming rating cliffs, cross-border transactions, AMBIF, 10 extension. These are just things which we look at. And if you look at the last part, that's something which we are focusing on quite a lot, which is sustainable finance, which includes green, blue, and even microfinance or sustainable bonds, social bonds if need be. Next slide, please. So in terms of our limits, I think our limits are pretty big right now. Most of the companies should be able to find, to be able to work within the limits which we have. So for a single transaction, a single group, we can do about $220 million. Our per country industry limit exposure still is about 300 million because we do not want to be exposed to just one sector in a particular country. We need to have a diversified portfolio. That's a very key aspect of our business. We have a country limit because we need to distribute our capacity across all countries in ASEAN. So we don't want too much of focus on one country. And then also we have per currency limit because this basically we've put in because certain capital markets are more developed than the others. And if we have a natural bias of just being completely agnostic to currency limits, we could gravitate towards doing deals more in the developed capital markets. So we have imposed this currency limit on us so that we can distribute risk and lead to development across the ASEAN countries. Typically, the tenors we support for normal financing is less than 10 years. But if there's a justification, if there's a project finance deal which we are looking at, which is possible in sustainable finance, especially in the energy space, we can go up to 15. In fact, we've done a deal up to 15 years in Vietnam, which was effectively for a solar power plant. Next slide, please. So this is our guarantee portfolio till now. And in the last 10 years, we've issued 42 guarantees, totaling to about 2.25 billion. We've issued guarantees from 12 of our 13 countries or issuers. It's a combination of issuances or issuers being domiciled of that country. 7 bonds have been successfully redeemed. Touch wood, we still haven't had a guarantee call event. I think that's something which we track very closely. So going forward, hopefully that situation should remain so. Last year, we issued 5 guarantees. And of these, we were very proud of the fact that we did our first 2 issuances in Cambodia, which is a very small market and a very nascent bond market. We also did a first by getting a Singaporean company which had investments in Japan to issue a bond in Japan, which also was a first for us. And we are looking at, and in terms of Philippines, we have been looking around for transactions, but Philippines, if you see in terms of our country limit, is still underrepresented because if we talk of about a $600 million country limit, we are, so if you see from this page, we can see Thailand, Vietnam have been very active markets for us in terms of notionals. Philippines slightly behind we have more 6 bonds, but I think if you look deeper into it, the number of issuers would be much lower. So that's something which we are very keen to rectify, because in our business plan, we are looking at markets like Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, markets where we really need them to catch up in terms of CGF supporting transactions. So I think this seminar is very key for us to reach out to potential issuers. We've had 2 guarantee issuances in January, and they were from Indonesia. So that's in line with our mandate to develop more issuers in Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, besides the BCLM countries, as we call, which is Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Next slide, please. So just to give you a brief, I know I have just 2-3 minutes left, so I'll just give a quick brief on the projects we've done. Next slide, please. In the renewable energy space, we actually worked with ADB on a transaction for AP renewables. This was done in 2016, and this is something which we worked on a risk-sharing basis with ADB. If anybody needs to know more details on this, we'd be very happy to for you to contact us, and we can discuss that. Next slide, please. We did a deal in 2019 in Vietnam, which was the first solar power project which we guaranteed alone. This project was up and running, so we moved in to refinance the existing lenders. As can be seen, this is the longest guarantee we've issued because it went out to 15 years, was all in Vietnam Dong. So that's a strength which we have vis-a-vis a lot of other multilateral agencies, because a lot of multilateral agencies and even the ADB have constraints in going out extremely long term when it comes to providing financing in local currency as a lender. But as a guarantor, since we're not raising local currency financing, we can actually support local currency financing up to 15 years. So that's a big strength we have, and I wanted to highlight that through this deal. Next slide, please. And then we did a deal in Thailand again with ADB, which is a risk participation in partnership. ADB had invested in these bonds. CGF went and bought half the risk from ADB, and we worked together as a team over there with ADB on this one. We've also done some deals in the microfinance space, which I just want to highlight, where Philippines has been pretty key for us. Next slide, please. Next one. So here we've supported Aon Credit, which is a Philippine-based issuer. And this is mainly into the microfinance space. We would have classified this as a social bond, but at that point in time, the standards were not that robust, so we didn't work on that. But yeah, going forward, if we do any deals like this, we would definitely try to explore the angle of doing a social bond. Next slide. We also worked with ASA Philippines, and this was a deal which we are very proud of, because in this place we were able to issue a partial guarantee, which we discussed before. And the fact is the issuer has been I think they've been behaving very well under COVID, which has been a big positive for us, and shows that this sector has got a lot of depth and strong issuers, which we want to tap onto. Next slide, please. And the last one we did was in Cambodia, again, the largest microfinance institution in Cambodia. We thought we can work on a social bond here, but then at that point in time, the issuer did not want to do it because they were a bit scared of the associated costs. But I think this is something going forward. If we look at deals of these sides, we would like to put them under the social and sustainable agenda. That's it from my side. I think we can discuss just a bit. Just want to leave you with a thought. If you can go to the next slide. I think just to give you a thought in terms of what our pipeline is in this space. So if you see, we are looking at, today we are working on a lot of green bonds and possibly one social bond out of Indonesia. As can be seen, we do, though it's a seminar which is focused on Philippines, this slide does not have any target from Philippines coming in. And I think that is more to do with the depth of the Philippine financial markets. I think Philippines has got a very strong financial markets in comparison to the ASEAN region. So the stronger companies are able to raise money much more easily as compared to the other jurisdictions where we are working in. So that sometimes becomes a constraint for us. But that said, we are very keen for people to reach out to us because, yeah, we want to change this and we want to add some more Filipino issuers in this. And I think I'll end with the next slide, which is talks about COVID-19. And since all the other people have not spoken about this, I think this is very typical in terms of COVID has been actually a big game changer and has changed the landscape substantially for us. So I think the whole of last year, we spent about 2 quarters, which is from April to September, just analyzing our portfolio and analyzing the potential deals we were getting in sectors. And that actually came up. We were able to come up with certain sectors which have had a positive impact on business and certain sectors which have been extremely negatively impacted by COVID. That's something which we keep in mind when we are assessing deals. I am not saying that companies which are in the high impact sector are a definite no for us. We know there are certain companies, even in the high impact sector, which have been extremely resilient and have done well. So we are open for business in terms of, please feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, these are the sectors which, how we've classified it. And I just thought we'd mention this in the end because it can give a guidance to a lot of people in terms of how CGIF would view deals going forward. That's it from my side. There's also a part which talks about the previous deals we've done, but I think time is at a premium right now. And these are transactions which we've done in the past. So all the information is available on our website. So do feel free to reach out there and have a look at these. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anuj. All right, so may we now call on all of our speakers if they could join us again on screen together with Mr. Bing Matoto. We will now move into our Q&A session. There seems to be a lot of questions coming from our audience. There's strong interest here.
Okay, Pam, do I take it away now?
Yes, please do.
Okay, Pam, I notice we're now way behind 2:30. And so what I want to do now is try to synthesize the questions that have been raised at the Q&A. So in the interest of time. Now, I think we need to put into context that most of the participants tend to be coming from perhaps not exactly the very large companies, I would guess. Because the very large companies, I suppose, probably know already what to do. So the questions then tend to revolve around that kind of a segment. So it involves one cost. What does it cost, for example, to get CGIF to provide its guarantee?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. And actually, it's a very difficult one to answer because at the end of the day, the cost of guarantee would be a function of the company's risk rating, because we follow a risk-based rating model and a cost recovery model. But I can tell you what I can say on this call pretty confidently is that we've never lost a deal on pricing. Because unlike a lot of other guarantors who would tend to have a more commercial outlook, I think CGIF looks at the developmental aspects of the deal first before we actually decide on pricing. So I think that is a big element of our decision on terms of how we do it. Typically, I can give you a range. So we have actually done deals which have been sub 1%, and we rarely go above 2% in terms of guarantee fee. So this can be a broad range, but where you lie within that would be a function of your individual credit rating. Because if you look at our spectrum, we have issuers which are rated single B to even triple B. So there would be there would be a difference on the strength of the cost of guarantee on the strength of the balance sheet, and that's something we are very mindful of.
Okay. So in other words, it doesn't have to be a AAA. You can go single B or a triple B type of a company.
That's right. So we have our internal models, and on that basis, we can actually, we do give feedback very quickly whether it meets our internal requirements or not.
So those ratings are your own internal ratings, not in reference to, let's say, for example, a local credit rating company like Phil Credit, or we have a local Philippine rating. So you don't depend on that kind of a rating when you say your own internal rating.
Yes. So we have our internal rating models, which we have morphed from S&P. S&P is a service provider. And on that basis, we have internal guidelines which have been set by our board in terms of minimal acceptable risk rating. The minimum acceptable risk rating takes into account the sovereign rating of the country where the issuer is from. And on that basis, we decide what the acceptable risk rating of the issuer should be.
Okay. In terms of type of facilities, do you only work with ongoing corporations? Do you do guarantees for projects, for example, startup projects?
Yeah, so we are very keen to consider project bonds. But one thing we're seeing is that if you look at project bonds in Asia, the certain markets, which the big ones are easily financed by the banks through project loans. We know that in the long run, as regulation is going, banks providing such long-term financing is not going to be very economical from a balance sheet perspective. So there has to be a development of project bond markets. As of now, we are a bit skeptical about greenfield risk because we're a small organization. And since we work pan-ASEAN, it's very difficult for us to be as conversant as a bank is in tracking at the construction phase. But what we would like to advise a lot of our potential issuers is that if you do look at a project bond, you could seek funding from the banks at the construction phase, but we could do a takeout and do a long-term financing through a project bond once the project is either close to completion or up and running.
You wouldn't take the initial project risk. What you're saying is that it's the end of the, in other words, a local bank would have to be the one that would have to take the initial project or construction risk. That's what you're saying.
Unless we get sponsor support, it is difficult for us to take initial project risk on a standalone basis.
So with recourse type of deals.
That's right. If it's with recourse, but once the project is up and running, we can do it without recourse also. But I think if you look at classical project financing, if it's at construction stage, we would only look at very strong sponsor support at that point in time.
Okay. Related question, I'll throw it to Paul. Beyond the credit guarantee facility, does ADB actually provide loans itself that could be tapped? I'm talking about corporate type of loans, not necessarily the big ones, again, second tier type of companies. I can't hear you. Is it just me? I can't hear you, Paul.
Better?
I also can't hear Pok. Go ahead, Pok. I think.
Oh, okay, good. Right. Actually, ADB actually does provide loans, but and also do investments in thematic bonds and also in companies. But that's being handled by our private sector operations departments.
Okay.
So in the case of if the issuer is let's say the issuer is being supported by our TA to issue the bonds, we can also discuss with our colleagues in the private sector operations department whether ADB would be interested to make any investments in that bonds, in that particular bonds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Related question either to Anuj or to Pok, or Karthik for that matter, although I understand, Karthik, your focus is more on sovereign issues, right? The question is really in terms of size. Right. Size of facility or loan or bonds that you'd be interested to get involved with. Again, considering that we're looking at second tier type of companies, perhaps, is there like a minimum amount that you're looking at before you would get into a project or a deal?
No, so for us, size is more limited by our single exposure limit, which is $220 million. I think the single largest guarantee we've issued till date is about $150 million. But the smallest guarantee we've done, we can do, depending on the sector and the company, we can even go $15, $20 million kind of deals. So it's not something that stops us from doing very large deals only. We can even look at smaller deals if the mandate, because if you look at the region we work in, like the two deals we've done in Cambodia, both put together are close to about $50 million. One of the issues only about 20 million. So yeah, we have to be open to that. And we have to be open to the fact that first-time issuers may not be as conversant or may not have the needs to issue large amounts. So we do take that into account while we are assessing credits.
How about you, Paul? In terms of actual loan participation, in terms of minimum amounts, how small can you go?
That's being, and then for our technical assistance support, we don't really focus so much on the size. And as I said, once the bond is issued, once the issuer has prepared the framework can be reused multiple times. And if we can, prepare the framework in a more flexible manner, as Karthik mentioned in his presentation on the Thai sustainability bonds. So as long as the framework is flexible enough, the issuer can use the same framework to tap the market several times. That's why we are not focusing so much on the large amount, on the large initial amount on the first issuance. But of course, we understand that issuers have different funding cycle. They have different needs as part of their business operations. So we don't really focus so much on the size as long as the issuer feels that it is feasible to issue a bond. And also, I would like to emphasize here that our technical assistance is only focused more on how to bring the bond to the market, right? The issuers still need to comply with the local regulations of the SEC. So our support, just in short, we don't so much focus so much on the size. And as a development bank, of course, we also want to see more smaller or mid-sized issuers coming to the market. So yeah, that's for me.
Okay. Does your technical assistance program also, is it, from my understanding from your presentation, in fact, private entities, private corporations can tap it, or are you limited to government organizations or NGOs?
For our TA program, our focus is on the corporate bond issuers.
I know, but okay.
Corporate.
So in other words, a corporation can in fact go to ADB and say, "Help me try to put together a green bond." That's what you're saying.
Correct. But
Okay.
I think Karthik can also elaborate on the SCGF as it's focused on the sovereign and sub-sovereign issues.
Okay. Karthik, would you like to elaborate on?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's no magic amount. So we've done in terms of individual pieces of TA for sovereigns and sub-sovereigns, under 100,000 as well. But we know that it's part of a larger program, and that is supporting something which is going beyond that individual TA. The pot as a whole for now, for example, that's been pledged on technical assistance with co-funders is about 7.5 million. And as I said, if you're doing future partnership, let's say with GCF, and they're looking at a big program, then it'll be defined by a much bigger pot, again, split between countries, in this case, given it's sovereign. The other angle to look at that is that if one of the intermediation is that we do provide that to, as I use the example of a facility for a particular government, and then they on-lend that to a bank, which can then send it to a private sector, that's fine from our point of view. We just need that sovereign backing at the top end, as long as there's enough impact and there's a market development going on at the bottom end. So that's sort of a one-step removed process. But the idea would be part of a larger program rather than individual loans. We can't do that. So.
Well, in terms of currency, my understanding is CGIF you only guarantee local currencies, right? So in other words, you've got a corporate issuing a corporate bond. For example, it's a corporate bond in pesos, but then he'd like to be able to attract, foreign fund managers. Would you be able to provide some sort of a currency hedge type of a facility that will essentially now translate a peso bond into a dollar-denominated exposure for an investor abroad? Are you able to provide that?
I don't think we need that, to be very honest, because a lot of investors, especially the foreign investors, have got baskets of local currency monies lying around. So they've got investments which ask them to seek for higher yields through local currency investments. So we've done deals in markets like Japan or Indonesia, where the investors have been from overseas. And typically, as is in the bond markets, the investors bear the currency risk. CGIF is more concerned about the issuers not having to bear a mismatch on currency. I think investors are savvy enough to understand, especially the large asset managers, they should be able to get the hedges of their own accord without any guarantee from our side.
Okay. Well, because earlier...
In reality, that happens also because we've had experiences of overseas investors investing in CGIF guaranteed paper. They do it for the fact that largely they end up getting a paper in local currency with local currency yields at a rating which is higher than even the sovereign. And then they manage the currency risk on their own.
Okay, so you're saying, because earlier Rob had indicated in response to a question that I raised related to that, he indicated, at least the way he's conveyed it to me, I got the sense that it was a structure that was not necessarily that attractive. So as a consequence, they tend to look at dollars. That's why I was inquiring about that. No? And is
to understand where you're coming from, because we
Yeah.
get similar queries a lot. Some investors ask us, some don't. Some are comfortable taking the risk. So that's the way it is.
Okay. Do we still have time to entertain other questions? Mike, any thoughts, or do we continue with a question?
We're okay to conclude, Bing.
All right. Okay. Well, if that's the
right.
case, then I'll turn it over back to Pam.
Thank you so much, Bing, and thank you so much for covering a lot of the key issues that have been raised. So we noted a lot of the questions have actually been answered directly by our speakers. So thank you so much. I believe that coming from the conversation, we've covered a lot of ground today, and that's precisely the point. This is supposed to be the start of a conversation, which we hope to continue to have between the private as well as the government sector. So may we now just call on Kun Pok to give us our closing remarks and what would be our next steps coming from today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pam. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers and also all the participants joining us here today. And also my apologies for running over time today. As you can see, we have lots of resources to support the sustainable finance development in the Philippines. We have the ASEAN +3 Green Bond TA to support the corporate bond issuers. We have also the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility to support the governments and also the sub-sovereign state-owned enterprise to issue thematic bonds, and also the CGIF to provide the credit guarantees in local currencies. So we would like to encourage all the participants in the capital markets to utilize these resources, especially for the CGIF, as Anush mentioned. The Philippine government is also a contributor and also a shareholder of CGIF. So let's use them. Let's use them to help develop the market in the Philippines. And also both SCGF and our ASEAN +3 TA, we are accountable to the ASEAN +3 governments. So we are also here to support the market development in the Philippines as well. Also, I would like to encourage everyone to visit the Asian Bonds Online website, as well as the ADB SCGF website. We have lots of resources there. And we also have all the facilities to support all kinds of issuers in the Philippines. Also, lastly, I would like to mention that after this workshop, we will be circulating a very short survey. We would appreciate your opinions and also your suggestions on how we can further improve the workshop and also our future webinars. And if you have any topics that you would like us to organize, please also feel free to let us know. And as Commissioner Amatong mentioned in his presentation slides, we will organize a series of workshops for all kinds of stakeholders in the Philippines. Our next workshop, we will focus more on the arrangers and also the underwriters on how to pitch the deal, on how to encourage the issuers to consider issuing any kind of thematic bonds in the Philippines. So we will be in touch with you, with regards to that workshop. And also, as Atedic mentioned in her opening remarks, I think it's important that we all learn from each other, and of course we will benefit from each other, but we will not get any benefit without acting together. Right. So that's all from me, and also thank you very much again to all the speakers, the organizers, FINEX, CMDC, SEC, and also all the participants. Thank you. Back to you, Pam.
Thank you so much, Kun Pok. So this concludes our program for today. Thank you very much to everybody. Again, the materials will be made available. You can also access the Asian Bonds Online website for some of the materials today. And we look forward to seeing you to the next in the series of webinars. Thank you so much and have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pop. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Thank you.
afternoon.
Bye.